happiness that an old acquaintance, as a mentor and as a teaching guide, is once again back with us in Delhi. Because when I was in Gujarat National Law University, we had the great privilege and the honor to invite Shri Sahu sir, who is the Joint Secretary to Rajya Sabha and a laureate of Gandhian studies. And the best part about Sahu sir happens to be that whenever I meet him, it's always the fact that now I have read, he informs me with a lot of aplomb and with a lot of enthusiasm that I've read these 145th Ghanaian volume I'm going through. In the next visit, he will tell me that it is the 75th Ghanaian volume that I'm going through. And I feel very much enamored of this kind of a reading zeal which he has. And apart from his exemplary administrative experience with the government of the country, he is a laureate on Gandhian studies, he is a good teacher, a compassionate human being, and that way my acquaintance led me on to myself introduce a couple of modules on Gandhian studies when I was in Gujarat National Law University, and that changed the color of the student dressage from saffron to khadi, and that was some achievement which I still attribute. My family knows about it to Sahu sir. This is one part of it, and I would just honor sir.
We are honored to have you here, sir. The dice is all yours.
Very young faces from very prestigious institutes, coming to this great mission established by earlier, more than 100 years back by Swami Vivekananda. And all of you are from very, very prestigious institutes. And it's extremely important to actually discuss Indian economy. I remember, I was greatly attracted towards Swami Vivekananda when I was in 9th standard. Nobody told me. I was hugely attracted. I continue to be a student of complete works of Swami Vivekananda. In fact, I delivered a lecture in IIM Calcutta on Swami Vivekananda's ideas of management. And even in XIMD Bhubaneswar, spirituality and entrepreneurship as envisaged by Swamiji, and so on and so forth. In fact, because it's being organized here, it's important to trace back such ideas of Indian economy to Swamiji's ideas. When he came back from US after his historic trip, during which he mesmerized the whole of America and Western world by enunciating and expounding the ideas on spirituality, he was asked a question by a disciple as to why he was silent in India. Because Swamiji is never remembered for having delivered a great speech in India. All his speeches were delivered, great speeches were delivered in the US and in Europe, primarily US. So when that question is asked to Swamiji as to why he remained silent in India and why he was not sharing his ideas on spirituality, Vedanta, to Indians, then he put a counter question to that disciple, saying, whom do I speak about spirituality? Do I speak to those people who didn't have education, who didn't have health, who didn't have food to eat? Was it appropriate on part of somebody who renounced the world and remained wedded to Vedanta to go and talk about Vedanta to those who didn't have food, education, and so on and so forth? Then the disciple asked, so what was to be done in India? They said, if you are true adherents of spirituality and Vedanta, we need to move from village to village and teach people how to do business. So, just imagine, that time he was talking about, moving from village to village and telling people how to do business. He said, if you cannot teach, if you could not teach people how to do business, how to start an entrepreneurs, how to become entrepreneurs, then what was the meaning of Vedanta? So he linked the ideas of spirituality with the ability to empower people economically. And then he said, once we teach them how to do business, once they earn their livelihood, we'll go and tell what religion or God is. And then he said, another point was, what was required in India then was to worship the belly god. And amazing thing he said, that people of India are like sleeping Leviathan. I don't know how many of you have studied Thomas Hobbes, British philosopher. He wrote a book called Leviathan. And Leviathan is a giant kind of a man who has all the powers. So the people of India are like sleeping Leviathan, they have to be woken up. And they have to be economically empowered, educationally enlightened, and so on and so forth. And then in another conversation of Swamiji, you would find, that remarkable ideas of Indian economy. He told a disciple, you want to fight against the Britishers, but you don't know how to manufacture immediately. In other words, the ability to fight against the British rule was linked to the ability to manufacture. Another disciple, I'm just referring to three disciples of Swamiji, who were deeply influenced by him for developing the economic thoughts. He advised a disciple to go to US and to sell some of the textile products of Hooghly. And when that disciple, he said, how do I go and do some business in US? Then immediately Swami said, haven't you read Vedanta? What does Vedanta teach you? That you are not this body and mind alone, you are the infinite. So if you are infinite, you can do anything. You can do any business as well. And he said, I will give you some money to start your business. The startup thing which, is being talked about in business since long. Swami said, I will give you some money to start the business. Go there and you will be a successful business. So this is how spirituality was linked with business. So having said this, now how the Indian economy as you now see, or as you now take pride, how did it evolve? It's important to go back to the freedom struggle. During freedom struggle, the whole idea of a caring, compassionate and inclusive economy was developed. And particularly, the ideas, see all of you know that Dadabhai Naoroji, the first economist of India, he said India was getting drained by British rule. And that famous book, Poverty and Un-British Rule, marked an era to understand the reasons behind poverty of India. And similarly, during freedom struggle, all of you know, certain aspects were taken up by Mahatma Gandhi to break salt law, to promote the cause of economic equality, and so on and so forth. In 1943, he came out with a blueprint for independence and for social transformation. That was constructive program. And in that constructive program, there were 18 points. One point was economic equality. He placed economic equality after communal harmony. Because Gandhiji stressed on communal harmony more than anything else. So he said there would be a bloody and violent revolution in India if the riches and wealth are not shared among people. So this kind of when we analyze the economic situation in India and the rest of the world, and when there is so much of inequality, be it which was manifested in the movement in the US called 1% versus 99%, or in the UK or in France or anywhere else. So because of this rising inequality, particularly income inequality, so therefore this economic equality which was emphasized by Gandhi assumes critical significance. That was also emphasized by B.R. Ambedkar and so on and so forth. But during freedom struggle, probably the only person who wrote an economic constitution for India, that was Mahatma Gandhi in 1928. And I would strongly recommend you to read that economic constitution. Never ever such an economic constitution was written. And in that constitution he wrote what kind of economy India would have. That it would provide livelihood, opportunities. Everybody should have employment opportunities, and nobody would be left behind, without which, he said, India would be thrown to anarchy. Now, this is the history against which you need to understand the economy of today. Now, when we became independent, most of the industrialists, they came to Bombay, they prepared a plan called Bombay Plan. And according to that plan, they urged this union government that it should play a key role in providing infrastructure, without which the private sector at that time was so weak that it didn't dare to go ahead to build India, which suffered such irreparable damage following colonial rule, that the retardation that Indian economy suffered could not be addressed by the ability and power of the private sector. So that Bombay plan entrusted the responsibility to the state, and that plan was submitted to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. So therefore, against that background, the architecture of mixed economy emerged in India, where the state would play a key role and the private sector will play its due role. Private sector was given due role but not the key role, because they expressed their inability to take forward the cause of economic growth, because they didn't have the money, they didn't have the expertise. So to that extent, the private sector relied on the state. So therefore, mixed economy, where, as Nehru said, the commanding heights of the economy will be provided by, commanding heights will be public sector undertakings, and so on and so forth. Because it was understood that after independence, how much steel India was producing? Hardly anything. And steel is the basic ingredient of industrialization. The country which produces more steel and uses that, that constitutes an indicator of the growth and development of the economy. So therefore, that is how the architecture of mixed economy was established in India. And it provided resilience and strength to Indian economy. And of course, it was carried forward through planning process. And the planning committee was established by Netaji Subhash Bose in 1930s. It was carried forward after independence. And through planning, the economic content was given to the political unity of India. Never in history, India was treated as one country, or never it attained that unity at the political plane. Maybe during Ashoka's time, to some extent, India was united. Maybe during Akbar's time, to some extent, India was united, not fully. And after the Britishers came, they had British provinces, princely state, and so on and so forth. So India was never united throughout its history. So after the division of India, it was thought that the one-time division of India would continue till the complete disintegration of India. Because it never in history a country was governed through democracy, united through democracy, and by employing parliamentary methods. For the first time it happened, and in 1927, in the House of Lords, a member of the British House of Lords, North Brooke, he told actually to entertain the idea that India would be governed by democracy constitute a wildest imagination that ever entered the mind of man. That was in 1927 North Brooke. So when he attempted to restructure India like that through parliamentary democracy, it was considered as a foolhardy approach. It was a highly audacious approach who never take shape. And therefore, disintegration, division of India was considered not a one-time effort, but a long-term, long-drawn-out affair whereby it would be completely divided. India's division took place in 1947, not because of Hindu-Muslim problem. That was the cover. India was divided for the energy security of the Western world. Because Soviet Union had a plan to come and occupy Afghanistan, use that as a base to extend its influence to the Gulf, and to foil that attempt of the erstwhile Soviet Union, India was divided by the whole Western world. It is documented in a book called Brotherhood of Oil. Sardar Patel has written a letter to Ghanshyam Das Birla in 1948, where he wrote how the petrol situation in the world played for the division of India. Now today when there is a quest for energy security, and particularly Gulf oil, I think this particular dimension of India's growth and development needs to be kept in mind. Having said this, when India started marching ahead after independence, its growth rate was 3%, 4%. It was described as the Hindu rate of growth. And that Hindu rate of growth was, this is from Professor K. N. Raj. Okay, so then the whole idea at that time was to establish a socialistic pattern of society where both private sector and public sector would play a role, but the commanding heights to be provided by public sector. But after 1980s, this Indian economy reached a stage where it was felt that sufficient conditions were created for the private sector to come and play its due role. So it was Indira Gandhi who is actually the author of economic reforms in India after she got elected in 1980s. And it has been written by so many other economic experts in India. In a full-fledged manner, it was Narasimha Rao who started economic reforms. Now, having started the economic reforms, the idea was that enough conditions had been created within the country for the private sector to play a key role. And therefore, there was some kind of a large consensus for the state to withdraw and the private sector, the corporate sector, to assume critical significance. And it so happened now, the entire growth of the economy is driven by the private or the corporate sector. The architecture of mixed economy has given way to an economic architecture where corporate sector is playing a key role. In other words, a culture of entrepreneurship defines this present state of economic growth in India. And because of that culture of entrepreneurship which was defined, because of the liberalization and so forth, therefore India's economic growth suddenly jumped up after the liberalization process. And fairly from a Hindu rate of growth which was called 3%, 4%, which are manifested in 3%, suddenly 8%, even 9%, sometimes and steady beyond 5-6%, it's continued. But this kind of growth which taking place both in India, China and the rest of Asia and many other parts of Asia, and even Africa is catching up. So it is understood that the engine of economic growth of the world is irreversibly shifting from America and Europe to India and China. So this is a historic shift that is taking place. That no more the America, no more the Europe, which are going to be the determining forces in world economy. And particularly this is significant after the financial crisis of 2008, which originated in the US. And why the financial crisis originated in the US? The inquiry commission which was established to look into that financial crisis, they said because of excessive deregulation, which were there after the depression of 1930s. The financial sector was deregulated, banking sector was deregulated. Professor Paul Krugman, who got Nobel Prize in economics, he wrote that after the depression of 1930s, banking was considered as boring in America. The boring banking was supposed to be exciting if the regulations were completely taken away. So therefore the regulations were taken away, and therefore it caused the crisis, because once you take the regulations, according to the commission of the report of the commission, there was massive breach of accountability and ethics. So therefore this crisis occurred, and the crisis enveloped the whole developed world. Luckily we were not that adversely affected. And why India was not that adversely affected? Because still we had regulatory mechanisms. Our banks were still in the public sector. Our public sectors, after liberalization, started functioning well. Out of 260 public sector units, 200 are profit-making. And they could address the liberalized environment by taking suitable measures. So this is amazing. And when the financial crisis which occurred in the US enveloped the world, it was here Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He said, India could withstand the financial crisis which originated in the US primarily because of the resilience of the public sector enterprises and public sector banks. Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate in economics, was advisor to President Clinton. He appreciated India's regulatory mechanism to control the financial sector. So this is the reason why we are now a great economy. It's not entirely because of liberalization, it's because of regulation as well. The nationalization of public sector banks during the 70s by Indira Gandhi was a masterstroke, and it still continues. So the resilience of such banks is extremely important, and therefore all such financial inclusion, the measures taken by the present government, these all supplement such measures. But having said this, while the biggest strength of India is its population. That is the biggest strength of Indian economy. 1 billion plus population, even if they consume little bit, nobody can challenge the Indian economy. So this is the biggest strength of Indian economy. Therefore, the rest of the world is turning to India for its human resource, for its vast market and so on and so forth. But after liberalization, after 90s, now there is a thinking going on that so much of inequality has emerged is rather threatening. IMF, which is actually the mouthpiece of liberalization, it has come out with some reports. It's called neoliberalism oversold. And what is neoliberalism? Neoliberalism means state will withdraw, and that space will be occupied by the private sectors. Education, health, and so on and so forth. Now we have so many private institutions providing education, so many private hospitals providing healthcare facilities and so on and so forth. Because this space which is occupied by a state has been withdrawn, that is now vacant, so private sector is playing a role. Even though we have public funded institutions which are playing a key role, be it IIT, IIM or NIT, whatever it is. And because of this, now certain aspects are now going to create problem. The IMF report, Neoliberalism Oversold, says that because of neoliberalism which was started after 90s, coinciding with our economic reforms, that happened across the world. There is a danger to economic growth, and danger comes from rising levels of inequality. You can go to Google and say neoliberalism oversold. It's a 3 pages, publication, just 3 pages, or maybe less than that, maybe 2.5 pages. It clearly says how the role of the state is important now to intervene. So the state's role has not been compromised even at this stage by any government, be it this government or previous government. Because previous government realized that role of the state has to be there. And therefore, state's role in terms of regulatory bodies is extremely significant to take forward the cause of economic growth. And another very interesting point is that, in this present era of Indian economy, what is required is innovation and a culture of entrepreneurship. And this culture of entrepreneurship assumes significance. And it assumes significance not only to take forward the cause of economy, but to create employment opportunities. And if I take you back to 1906, for the first time in the history of humanity, Gandhi started a non-violent movement in South Africa for the rights and dignity of Indians. He wrote a book called Satyagraha in South Africa. All of you should read that book. He said why Indians were deprived of their rights in South Africa. It's not because of the color of skin alone. He said Indians were deprived because all those Indians, whether they were coolies, they were called coolies, or business people, they were doing some business or other in South Africa. And they started getting better profits than the Britishers, who were settlers and who were the rulers. So when Indians started getting better profits, they wanted to paralyze Indians by withdrawing those rights, including the right to do business. It's very fascinating to understand this history, that you withdraw that right to do business and Indians will collapse and then Britishers will assume monopoly. So therefore, Gandhi said, trade jealousy led to the deprivation of rights for Indians. And he wrote in Natal Gazetteer of 1896 or something, exclusion in the matters of business has become obsolete. Now just imagine. So that time he said, one of the objectives of first Satyagraha is to restore the rights of Indians to do business. So he was fighting for the rights of Indians to do business. At that time also Tatas were trying to establish the first ever steel plant in Jamshedpur. Exactly 100 years later, Tatas bought the largest steel plant of UK, Chorus. So when Tatas were trying to establish the steel plant in 1906, they approached the British authorities for help. And British authorities told them sarcastically, you want to produce steel? Go ahead. Every pound of steel that you are going to produce will be used by us during our breakfast. They wanted to eat steel. They thought Tatas cannot produce steel. But they established the steel plant, and 100 years later, they bought the largest steel plant of Britain. So it was a poetic justice. So Indians were scoffed at, whose rights were denied, who were denied the right to do business, emerged as great entrepreneurs. So that culture of entrepreneurship, that spirit is required to be developed in India of 21st century, when irreversibly the engine of economic growth is shifting to Asia. And therefore, in this context, what is required when Indian economy is assuming global significance? This is bound to be search for energy. This is bound to be search for equality. This is bound to be search for sustainability. So this energy security, sustainability, and equality, they have to be pillars of economic growth. Otherwise, economic growth will collapse. Now, how do you look at the sustainability issue? You know, when Japan was developing 7%, 8%, or even 12%, I went to Japan, they say, the more, black smoke that you see in the sky, the more progress Japan was attaining. Now, can you afford to do this now? We can do this. So therefore, sustainable means more renewable energy and more environment-friendly measures and so on and so forth. Similarly, another key point is that the sustainability comes from more renewable energy resources, which is being emphasized by this government, which is quite heartening. And another point, as I told you, corporate governance is the key for better economic growth and inclusive economic growth. See, now since the entire architecture of economy is based on corporate sector, private sector, so what is required is corporate governance, better governance. And corporate governance must remain tuned to the provisions of the Constitution. See, Companies Act of 2013 provides that architecture for corporate governance. Because when the corporate sector is playing such a key role, the governance within corporate sector is going to be, now for the first time in the history of Indian economy, now it is mandated by law that there should be a woman director in every company with 100 crores of paid-up capital and 300 crores of turnover. Never there was a place given to women in the company boards. So the manner in which company boards will function will determine the economic character and content of India. So why only one women director? Why not many? So the first step has been taken. More steps have been taken for the cause of gender equality. So this is another challenge for Indian economy, to restructure patriarchy, to challenge patriarchy. Human Development Report of 2005, it stated, there is a nice sentence, if development is not engendered, it will be endangered. So we need to engender the economy of India. It's unfortunate that many steps have been taken, but it's too little and too less. See, if you look at the gender issue, then recently I was reading on International Women's Day in Hindu, there was a nice article that women workforce has declined in India from 24% to 21%. Whereas in other countries, developed countries, be it Japan or anywhere, it's going up. Because they want to take women from the domestic frontiers and engage them in the economic frontiers. They don't have people, but we have people. So this is a big challenge for the Indian economy. More women should be integrated beyond domestic frontiers. And then sustainability, as I told you, I presented a paper, Gender Diversity in Company Boards. And I gave that argument by referring to some of the articles of Harvard Business Review. I mean, all of you who are studying management, you need to study that. Some of the articles of Harvard Business Review. So these are the challenges which India faces: more gender equality, more inclusion, more equality, and obviously, last point I would like to say, more emphasis on micro and small enterprises. No great economy has emerged on the strength of big corporates. In the micro and small enterprises which constitute the strength of economy. See, Japan's rise as an economic power could be attributed to its resilient micro and small enterprises. All of you know that Japan has not drafted its constitution. Are you aware of this or not? Japan's constitution was drafted by America. And because America drafted their constitution, they don't have military. They don't spend for military expenditure. America provides. So to that extent, Japan is not an independent country. But Japan is economically independent because of the small and medium enterprises, not because of corporates. So therefore, this particular approach to strengthen small and medium enterprises is extremely critical for Indian economy. Any attempt in that direction would be an attempt to strengthen Indian economy. And plus equality and harmony among diverse sections of Indian society. These are the points, because never ever there will be growth and development if there is disharmony and disturbance in society. So therefore, governance must be based on constitutional principles, and corporate governance must be tuned to the goals of the Constitution. And in that context, corporate social responsibility is critical. And now corporate social responsibility is mandated by law. And that law is to be adhered to. Now if this is done, then there will be caring and inclusive economy. So thank you so much. I would like to give a broad perspective of Indian economy. And I thought it was important to discuss these points, because I want to trigger your thinking by taking into account all these factors, which are extremely critical. And in the context of the world economy, Indian economy is doing very well. The only problem is that we need to address the rising levels of inequality, which is very, very disturbing. The rising levels of inequality would lead to rising levels of disturbance, be it nocturnal violence or be it anything else. So therefore, along with that, there must be efforts for inclusion. There must be efforts for promoting more micro and small enterprises. There must be efforts to address the issue of entrenched patriarchy, and that can be addressed through proactive, affirmative measures to bring more women to the economic sector, which is not taking place. So thank you so much for this patient hearing, and we can discuss it further.
We will soon open the house for a round of questions to be addressed to Sahu sir. After I just give my concluding remarks for a couple of minutes, then I will be standing here between you and Sahu sir. So the idea is that when we talk about the state of Indian economy, I would first of all like to extend my heartfelt thankfulness to Sahu sir for being here with us in the Ramakrishna Mission as part of the Think India program, where he has elucidated upon the state of the Indian economy and the general philosophy and the general construct of happenings which laid the foundation of the Indian economic growth and the Indian industrial performance. So I would just like to comment very briefly. Then if you look at the economic survey of 2017, then we are going to find that it's a brilliant exposition of the achievements of what Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has been able to achieve, where it has been forecasted that the GDP growth rate is going to jump from 7.75% to 8.5%, and the lags which are there might be caused for a short period of time because of some confusions or misappropriations which are linked up to GST, and to the negatively propagated idiom of demonetization. Otherwise, what the survey says, economic survey, the current economic survey says that the idea of universal economic, the idea of universal income is going to be the ragtime mantra of the Indian Union, which will take the masses out of impoverishment and poverty. And I would, coming back to what Sir had to say in his nice lecture, informative lecture, that it is all about entrepreneurship, it is all about livelihood, it is all about economic equality, and creating a discourse or maybe some kind of a discussion or deliberation which can be initiated between, as Sir had said, between communal harmony and economic equality, and the steel architecture of the Indian industrial thing, that does it actually impede the growth, and are we going too much towards neoliberal tenets of development? These are the posers, these are the questions that need to be emphasized upon and revisited upon by the young population of the country, by the students of the country, so that the efforts of the government can also be looked into it positively. And I once again thank Sahu sir to be here with us. I would end here, and we can have a question and answer session with Sahu sir. Thank you. You can ask amongst the.
Percentage that they are to spend in a corporate social responsibility, and in that some companies are what doing, they just because I serve on an NGO, they just call us, we want to distribute biscuits to students, we want to distribute this particular thing, so that money is not formulated into a proper policy framework so that something good can be done. So can a proper policy framework can be created by the side of government, so that that particular fund can be formulated in a proper manner for the betterment of society and that money.
No, it's already made. CSR guidelines are available. See, just by, they have to show it in their annual reports. Okay? Now, this kind of, the example that you gave, that they will give some discourse to the NGOs and then distribute it to their fulfill. But that is not treated as corporate social responsibility. So the monitoring mechanism has been provided in the Companies Act itself. So what is required is an effective implementation by the government agencies. See now, it's already well defined. It's not that it's not defined. What we are saying doesn't constitute a distribution of discourse, doesn't constitute corporate social responsibility. There are clear, defined and demarcated areas where they have to perform. So therefore, what is required is the strict implementation of those guidelines. See, let me tell you about I will tell you one example. Representation of one lady, in the director in company board. It is not even fulfilled by the public sector undertakings. And most of the private sector undertakings have not done so far as yet. So there is a problem of implementation of that. Implementation can be done. So many other things are done. This also can be done. Otherwise, economy will suffer.
Because of my suggestion was a bit related to, because they are on the voluntary basis. As per the guidelines, they are on the voluntary basis, where they have to.
They are not voluntary. They are
in
mandatory.
what manner they have to formulate that particular.
No, it's all mandatory. CSR guidelines are mandatory for all companies. It is there. You see the Companies Act. Companies Act 2013. Is a remarkable, great, legislation. Which has made CSR mandatory. And for the public sector undertaking, CSR guidelines are absolutely mandatory. And why they could not fulfill those mandatory guidelines have to be mentioned in the annual report of the companies. Now it is not left to much interpretation or anything, it has to be implemented. And there must be some penal measures also being prescribed. So the only thing is that they have to be implemented by the government.
We can have a few more questions from the audience.
Sir, I wanted to ask that recently CSO has raised
and all, they have achieved a convergence over the time. But the India, there is a continuous divergence. Means there is a gap, means the increasing gap between the richer and poor. The richer are becoming more richer and the poor are becoming more poorer. So means there is a lack of this inclusive growth. So what are the steps the government is considering to tackle this issue?
Yeah, see, the many programs for economic inclusion, they are already there. This is a very, very tough job to do for equality and all that. If that is not addressed, the problem of inequality, it might adversely affect the growth. How it has to be done, to my mind, for instance. See, there is a policy of the government of India. It's called Prime Minister's Rojgar Yojana. Okay. Now, thousands of people apply, to get the loan under the Prime Minister's Rojgar Yojana. But unfortunately, this policy is since law. This policy was prepared or formulated to create the culture of entrepreneurship for the youngsters. Okay, those who studied after 8th standard or something. Okay. Now the point is, why banks are not giving loan once a person has been selected under this rule? The problem is bank loan. So to start a business enterprise, you require access to credit, which is extremely important. Now if you go to a bank, suppose you want to start an enterprise, you go to the bank, unless you know somebody who will be getting a credit. So therefore, accessibility to credit has to be made extremely simple and smooth. And that has to be ensured. Otherwise, this problem of inequality will continue. See, the innovation, many schemes are there to promote the culture of innovation. And those have to be implemented. And no government and no society can create jobs for the billions and billions of young people that are coming. What has to be done is to create a culture of entrepreneurs, so that they can be encouraged to start their own enterprises. But for that, what is required is infrastructure, for access to credit and so on. Muhammad Yunus, founder of the Grameen Bank, he once said, access to credit is a human right. It's a beautiful line from him. Now, who doesn't want credit? You tell me. Can any business survive without credit? But you go to our banks, it's so tough to get a credit, except people like Vijay Malayam. So, but people who are to genuinely pursue business, they don't take credit. People like Vijay Malayam, they will take credit and run away from this. Okay. And then you try for extradition and so on and so forth. And I'm sure you will be extradited. That is it. So here the point is why banks are not sensitive to the needs of the entrepreneurs. This requires a huge sensitization program. So therefore, the role of banks is critical significance. To create a culture of entrepreneurship as much as the policy. Why under the Prime Minister's Rojgar Yojana, which is not a new Yojana, it is going on for several years maybe a decade or so. 8th standard people in urban areas can apply, but it's so tough to get a loan, even to get selected. Unless you bribe the officials of the district industrial center, they won't enlist your name there. Now, these are the problems which need to be handled.
We can have a third question from the audience.
Sir, primarily, first of all, let me just introduce myself. I'm Rajya Sabha from NIT Srinagar. I'm a pass out of NIT Srinagar. Sir, I basically have two questions from you. Perhaps those areas were a bit untouched. Firstly, I would like to talk about mainly the farming sector of our country. Like, as we already know that the entire country's economy runs basically on the farming sector. Why is it so that despite having so many 5-year plans right since the inception and then till now we are running so many programs, introducing various missions have been also introduced like soil health cards and so many Fasal Bima Yojana and all that. Why that this state has come that year after year we always think that this loan needs to be like strapped off, they need to be like given off this loan. Why that condition is still continuing? We are having a very strong network of banks, we are having a very strong policy, so many plans. Still, why so that we are only crediting and crediting to the farmers? Why that return is not coming?
Okay, that's one question.
Yeah, and my second question is that, like we're talking about bank sector, about the nationalization of banks. Same thing is happening with a bit of banks also, like all the nationalized banks we have. Many a times we can see a lot of bad loans are there, some big entrepreneurs, they're running out of the country or whatever. But apart from that, some hugely reputed banks, nationalized banks, they are also having very, you can say, challenging times at right now. Though we have some merging of like SBIs and other partner banks, but why the other nationalized big banks who are having strong regional networks, they are also struggling. Why so? Why like that?
No, they are not, see, most of the, I'm trying to answer your second question first. See, if you analyze the NPS, bad loans, let's say, so most of the defaulters are the big corporates, not the medium and small enterprises. The default is very, very less. Okay. So therefore, the medium and small enterprise, they are more creditworthy. Now, why banks are not giving why they are giving credit to the big corporates and not to the medium and small enterprises? That's a question which needs, this is an issue which needs greater analysis. The analysis is that corporates have better political affiliation. They can mobilize better political strength in their favor. And they have a better brand image and brand building. So therefore they are issuing. So for instance, Vijay Malay, once a bank official was asked, why did you give so much money? He said it has a brand value. And just because of brand value, they just started issuing so much of loan. So therefore, here what is required? I feel, because when I was working in the parliamentary committee in industry, we used to interact with the banks. So the banks, they need to be sensitized, repeated sensitizedness needed. They are not really enough, they are not sensitized enough repeatedly. And they tell us, we go by the dictates of the past. Now, if that is the case, then how do you promote a culture of enterprise? Okay, so that orientation of the banking officials needs to be changed. Now, you simplify the procedure. Within 30 days, the papers have to be cleared and loan has to be issued. This deadline is not being followed. And if a penal measure is prescribed to hold the government official, bank officer account, and then according to procedure against them, this will serve a great purpose. That is not being done. Okay. Your first question of farming sector, yes. Agricultural sector in India do not create enough employment opportunities or livelihood opportunities for the millions of our country. And this issue has been taken up right since 19th century. If you see the speeches of Mahatma Gandhi and all that, that's why he turned to farming, a supplementary income and all that. Because of the huge population, the agricultural land holdings in villages, they get fragmented. And when agricultural land holdings get fragmented, obviously productivity declines. Okay, this is one of the reasons why agriculture is not able to provide livelihood opportunities to millions. Supplementary income has to be there. And what is that supplementary income? That has to be determined by the society, by the state. Let's say during freedom struggle, Gandhi said Khadi. In many other parts of India, there are many other agro industries and all that kind of. Even leather work, tannery and all that. Now, as the economy, now we are not all that critically dependent on agriculture sector. Our GDP is not critically dependent. Now, service sector, manufacturing sector, insurance sector. Earlier it was huge, now it is probably 15 or 20%. The important point is to help the farmers or the village people who are critically dependent. Some kind of skill development is required in other sectors so that there will be a smooth transition from agriculture to manufacturing. That skill development program, that's why there is so much of an emphasis. But then that's not enough as well, because what do you gain by developing a skill when you have an IIM degree or an IIT degree or an NIT degree? So you have a higher skill then. So the main reason why farming sector has declined is because of the policies of the government. Okay, now probably better harvest and everything is there, but then the failure of the crops, climate change, global warming, some of the genetically engineered seeds and all that, because of that it has actually declined. But there is a hope. The hope is that the emphasis is on to revive the agriculture and at the same time promote the manufacturing sector so that they can absorb the manufacturing sector.
So like now, as you can see, our Honorable Prime Minister is saying that we need to double the income of the farmers by 2022. So what do you think? How is it possible? Because this climate change obviously is going to be there. We are so heavily dependent on monsoon. So what do you think? What are the steps that can be
It's a
taken?
very, very challenging feature of the Prime Minister. And it's very tough to meet that challenge as well. But the fact that we have a bumper crop this year, you must have read in the reports.
Yeah.
So that gives a little hope, that yes, it is possible. But the government, I think this government is going by the recommendations of the MS Swaminathan Commission, the National Commission on Farmers. If you go through the recommendations of that commission, I think it's those things need to be pursued. Let farming or agriculture be again made more attractive for the youth. That is the key issue. Unless more youth get attracted towards the farming and agriculture sector, and that is where he prescribes certain measures. Those measures need to be followed. The government which appointed that commission rejected that report. But at least this government has accepted, or at least they had extended support to the commission. I think those reports need to be taken forward. Another point I would like to suggest, you see the pulses and the oil seeds. We are dependent on so much of import from abroad. That needs to be reduced by encouraging the farmers to go for those crops, and particularly motivating the younger people to adopt those crops.
I have one more question.
Actually, there was a nice discussion on this universal basic income. The point is, really, this fiscal space, it's a great objective, no doubt about it. Universal basic income is a very noble and great objective, which needs to be loved. But the problem is fiscal space. Now, if for universal income, midday meal scheme has to be reduced, or the ration card facilities have to be reduced, then that will complicate the situation. Okay. The point is, the economy has to grow like 9%, 10%. So to my mind, universal basic income is just an objective. How to mobilize the resources for universal income is a big question, a big challenge. And second is job loss due to automation. Actually it is described that now after the liberalization process across the world, it's not India alone. After 90s, let's say, it was said that there is a jobless growth. Growth is taking place, but jobs are not created. This is not a phenomenon confined to India, it's been in US everywhere. And now there is automation coming up. And automation due to internet. There is something called IoT, Internet of Things. And IoT get so much expanded. Many of my friends are working in the IoT sector. They say everything would be controlled by internet. Okay. So that automation again is a big challenge. So it might lead to a lot of unrest in society. But how to address that? Again, the role of the state comes into play, as I told you. Now even IMF is saying, IMF, which was almost the spokes institution of neoliberal economy, they are saying that state has to play a role. Now state's role to regulate that automation, how automation should proceed,
I would recommend the last issue of the Economist, London Economist. Have you seen that? You know, live during London. Just read that. 2 pages. Economist, last issue. You know, that will provide you little more insights.
So we would have liked that Sahu sir would have continued for another half an hour, 1 hour, but we have a paucity of time. So I just end with a few concluding remarks that it is economic equality and the idiom of inclusiveness which ought to be the right dharma of the government of the day, and that is what the government has been striving in the last 2.5 odd years. And I would just remark very briefly that when we talk about economic development and industrial growth in the country, it is the Vivgor coloring of Make in India. It is the Vivgor coloring of the dance of the lion, which comes to my mind. And as David Malone has also said, that the elephant has learned to dance, and the tiger and the lion has learned to roar. So that happens to be the idiom of economic growth in the nation. But we have a rider, as sir pointed out, the rider of ragtime, wherein this particular novella from American classics, they said that tracks everywhere, leading on to their serpentine ways, connecting both the coasts of America with people toiling hard. So this is the debate, this is the dilemma which lies enshrined in what Sahu sir had to say.